I think the folks who are catastrophizing around AI consuming jobs have got it all wrong because when things like artificial intelligence works well, it works well when a human is in the loop and the workflow is redesigned to optimize both. When you look to just take the human out and put the tool in, you underestimate the power of both. And so I'm an advocate for putting the human at the center.
Welcome to Climbing the Corporate Ladder Without Breaking a Heel. I'm your host, Dr. Cynthia. With over 30 years in the corporate world as a single mom, cancer survivor, and often the only woman in the C-suite, I understand the balancing act high-achieving women face. Now an executive coach and international speaker, my mission is to embolden every woman in the C-suite or on the rise to claim her agency and challenge the norms holding her back. Tailored for ambitious professional women, this show features candid conversations with powerful business leaders sharing their real stories of success and failure. If you're ready to look up and step up, you're in the right place. Join us and invest in your future today. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Climbing the Corporate Ladder Without Breaking a Heel. I am your host and your coach, Dr. Cynthia. Really excited about today's guest. We're particularly focused on the future of work and that which makes us uniquely human. And today's guest, Heather McGowan, is one of Forbes' top futurists. She brings fresh energy and actionable insights to the future of work. A sought-after strategist, keynote speaker, and 2 times best-selling author, she equips organizations to navigate relentless change for activating their most critical resource, their people, something she and I have in common. Heather's audiences range from startups to publicly traded companies, including Google, JP Morgan Chase, MasterCard, and Kaiser Permanente. Through data-driven insights and powerful visual frameworks, she helps leaders and teams to transform their distinctly human capabilities. And we're going to dive into some of this: adaptability, empathy, curiosity, into strategic advantages. She's been often quoted in the New York Times, with Thomas Friedman calling her an oasis for her insights. Heather's best-selling books include The Adaptation Advantage and The Empathy Advantage, which I have a small cameo appearance, which was named one of the top 10 business books of 2023. By teaching people to ask better questions, Heather enables them to adapt at the speed of possibility to solve tomorrow's problems. In addition to all of those credentials, she's become a dear friend. She's been a mentor to me as a new author and a sponsor of my work, and I could not be more grateful of her generosity. Heather, thanks so much for being on today's show.
Oh, thanks. Nice to talk to you.
It's good always to talk to you. I want to start with so many of our themes parallel and complement one another. This notion around what's actually changing in the work. I feel like there's so much myth and misalignment and misunderstanding. From your perspective, you've said that the future of work isn't about jobs disappearing, but work fundamentally changing. Talk
Mhm.
about that.
Yeah, I think the folks who are catastrophizing around AI consuming jobs have got it all wrong because when things like artificial intelligence works well, it works well when a human is in the loop and the workflow is redesigned to optimize both. When you look to just take the human out and put the tool in, you underestimate the power of both. And so I'm an advocate for putting the human at the center as more of a conductor around tasks that
Hmm.
technologies will consume. They'll certainly consume tasks, they always have.
Right.
I mean, we don't all grow our own food anymore, less than 2% of us do, and we have more food than we've ever had before, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's changing and we're changing with it. And this isn't the first time technology, automation, innovation have changed. Certainly, perhaps maybe at the speed, it's different than ever before.
Yeah, and that's an important thing to think about because we've got, 2 or 300,000 years of human history, and for biological evolution to take place, and we are still evolving. We're, starting to lose our wisdom teeth. We've developed lactose tolerance. We've developed lighter skin, bluer eyes, and for some folks through to migration. So we have these biological changes that take place. But if you look at human history, we've had 5 eras: the hunter-gatherer era, the agricultural era, the industrial, the information, and now we're in the augmented or the cognitive or the AI era. Most of our evolution took place in the hunter-gatherer era. Most of our human history was the hunter-gatherer era. So the last 3 eras, no biological changes, all
Mm.
cultural changes and that's why it feels so hard to adapt right now.
Yeah, that is fascinating because it's foreign to to those of us living in existence right now. It's that piece of our evolutionary change is newer to us.
Yeah, our brain hasn't fundamentally changed, but we've just added a whole lot more distractions. I mean, that's one
Right.
area we could look at.
Yeah. When you think about the woman listening who feels like she's trying to do everything, but still is really uneasy about the speed of change and this evolution that the person listening is in, what signals should they be particularly listening to that say, yeah, maybe you're not pivoting or maybe there is more that you need to be investing in?
Well, one, put down your phone.
Mm.
I mean, you could hold a mirror up to me as I say that because I need to say
Yeah,
it myself more than anybody else, but
same. Guilty.
put down your phone. I mean, so much time is being sucked into that distraction, and there was some recent research, I use it in my talks that, if you were at one of the events, and they used 3, I believe it was the, Boston Marathon bombing, Superstorm Sandy, and, 9/11. If you were at that event or you consumed 6 or more hours of media, you had a higher levels of stress from the media consumption than you did actually being at the event, but we're all doing it. So we're
Wow.
all contributing to our levels of stress, or we've got essentially the same brain we've had from the Stone Age, and we've added so much more stress and really no more uncertainty, but the perception of certainty. So, when we were
Mm.
hunter gatherers, there was no food app, there was no weather app, there wasn't your packages arriving between 1 and 3. But we've got all these expectations of certainty in a time that we've got higher levels of uncertainty, perception of higher levels of uncertainty. So, sure, we have higher levels of economic uncertainty, but we don't necessarily have higher levels of certainty across the board. But that perception is causing greater levels of stress in us.
So I wanna say that back because I think that's really profound, and I hadn't thought about it that way before, that life and experiences are just as uncertain as they were back when we didn't know where our next meal was coming from.
Right.
And yet, because we have information instantaneously that portends to be fact, isn't always,
Yeah.
more often it's not, right? But it gives us this sort of false sense of
Right.
security, control, awareness that
Expectations.
expectations.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is fascinating. And it speaks to adaptability too,
Right.
right? Our ability to adapt. You talk about that and how that is going to be such a core important competency, probably above and beyond most others. Talk
Right.
about that adaptability and how does the person exercise that muscle?
Well, I talk about COVID a lot, and people are like, "Don't talk about COVID, it's over." And, I was perplexed by why COVID is something we don't wanna talk about. And I look at the 1918 flu. The real seminal book to me on that was The Pale Rider, and I interviewed the person who wrote that book. Now, the 1918 flu killed as many people, or nearly as many people, as World War II, but there's not books and movies and plays about it.
Mm.
And I asked the author, we talked about it, I said, "Why do you think that is? Why do you think that we mythologize World War II, and we wanna have these experiences and these movies and these plays and this music about it?" And she said, "Because I think that World War II was something we had to convince ourselves was the right thing to do, so there was a need to all get on board with the idea of a conflict and sending our young men, largely young men, but some women, off to perhaps their death. And the other thing was it was experienced by a very small percentage of people. So what we
Mhm.
didn't experience, we imagined and we created theater around it. We all experienced COVID. Nobody missed it. And everybody experienced the 1918 flu. So when we have a collective experience and sort of a collective trauma, we want to put it behind us. But the interesting thing is the reason I talk about COVID is we adapted so superbly to that moment. And if you just look across some of the areas I've worked in, like work in education, say, I worked in higher ed for about a decade, and so many faculty said, "I can't teach this course online. This faculty member won't teach online." Well, inside of 2 weeks to a month, everything was
Mhm.
working relatively well. I mean, lots of stuff went wrong. We shouldn't have done it as long as we did. Maybe younger kids shouldn't have been isolated. There's lots of things we could have learned from them. But based on what we knew, it went really well, and if you look across business continuity in the areas that weren't shut down, we're really quite good. And if you look at Gallup's engagement scores, our highest levels of engagement were that first 6 months of COVID. Highest levels of employee engagement and highest levels of relationships between leaders and their direct reports. Now we have
Mm.
the lowest. So why was it so high in that trauma? And I think it's because we were all experiencing something together, and we had no choice but to be vulnerable. We had no choice but to be human, and we demonstrated real care towards each other. And
Mhm.
I think one of the connections between leaders and their direct reports is that many organizations said, well, we could lay off like a ton of people and then have more of us doing work, or we could have some shared pain. And
Right.
some at a certain level above said, we're going to take a 10% pay cut or a 20% pay cut, and we're going to freeze bonuses so that and so that we can keep more people employed and keep us more functioning. And that shared experience led to higher levels of engagement and better relationships. And my question is, why can't we do that now? Why can't we adapt? Why can't we be compassionate? Why can't we care for each other? And why can we have that level of performance now, not in a crisis?
Yeah, it's interesting because you and I've talked about this, during just post, I think, the COVID
Yeah.
time. I was in healthcare at the
Yeah.
time,
Right.
and, healthcare being delivered virtually. Um, there were organizations that were way out ahead of
Yep.
virtual care, but getting shut down a lot of pushback, and yet a lot was capabilities came alive. My daughter-in-law is a therapist, a counselor, and she specifically and only does virtual therapy.
Yep.
And she's very busy and it's highly effective, but we would not have given that the credibility that it has today had we not gone through COVID, I believe. And yet it opens up so many doors. It allows us to scale and to meet people where they are literally today.
Yeah, mental health for sure. That's a huge leap forward, but also like little things like, say I have a cut on my elbow and I say,
Mhm.
do I need to get stitches on this? And
That's
they
right.
say, yes, come in. You just saved me having to, or no, don't. Saving me take time out, drive down, find parking, get in, register, 2 hours out of my day in 15 minutes for something. Yes, no.
Right.
That was a huge break. And getting people not to avoid appointments because they don't think they have time for them by making it fit into the more flow of life.
Yeah, it definitely moved us in a whole different direction. But I wanna come back to the real emphasis of your point about that human condition and how leaders and employees sort of, um, worked together and there was care and compassion and so on. That's one of the things I hear a lot that people struggle with around with AI and automation and all these things, this fear that jobs are gonna go away. You and I
Mhm.
both share a belief that that's not gonna happen. Um, but I do believe that people need to further tap into what makes me uniquely human. And so when you think about with all of this transformation that's happening and the speed with which it's happening, where do you advise the person listening to double down to really find and explore and develop that which is uniquely human?
Well, I give people a caution. I say definitely use definitely play with Leia. Don't be, don't be a Luddite or whatever and avoid it. Because it's coming and it's coming whether you like it or not. And the more you understand it, the more you're better at using it. And the other thing is don't give up control. So it's really easy in a meeting. This is a classic example. If you're using a note taker like Otter or whatever Zoom uses or Teams uses, whatever the built-in AI functionality that will do a transcript and
Right.
then will allow you to ask questions to it and create a summary and key points and all that stuff. That's really important synthesis, and it can be very helpful. So for every one of my tech, my pre-decision, my prep calls with my clients, I always have an AI note taker. But that doesn't mean I sit there and go, I'm really engaged. I'm more engaged because I don't have to record what people are saying. I can be like, "Oh, that makes me think of this. I should ask him a question about that." It gives me more space to think. And then after the meeting, I review the summary, I review my notes, and I synthesize them. If you just copy and paste the notes, you're missing that really
Mm.
important productive friction. Learning comes from friction. If you relinquish synthesis and you relinquish key points and you don't push back and think about what you were thinking at the time, you're giving up a lot of your cognitive, potential for growth. So you should think about it like a cognitive partner, not replacing what you do. And the other thing is, AI is going to soon come up with better answers than we can, but we have the consequences of those answers.
Right.
So if we don't understand them and we don't try to engage with it, like you let it come up with a better answer, you force a better question, and then you think through the strategic implications of that decision. That's where the human really needs to play in it. So the kinds of things you want to work on is thinking about synthesis, thinking about asking better questions. I have a whole talk on asking better questions. Thinking about the implications, the ethical implications of it. Now, we may be able to
Right.
code ethics, and we may have it come up with some better ethical arguments. But at the end of the day, we live with the consequences, and we
Yeah.
can't relinquish that.
And it's reporting back to us so much of we're putting in. We have to
Yeah.
we have to realize that, it's taking all of this information that we're feeding it and reporting it back to us. I really wanna to put a fine point, that was so helpful, and it's something that I could certainly personally benefit from, is this idea of taking the notes. Just it's a simple example, but
Yeah.
taking the notes and then saying, to your point, what did this trigger? What follow-up question do I wish I would have asked in hindsight
Yeah.
that I didn't? What does this reveal that I wasn't thinking about? Um, there's so much benefit in that because I'm such a pen to paper person, right? That's how
Mhm.
I think, that's how I
Yeah.
learn. And when AI is just capturing it and spitting it out and we stick it in a file, we've kind of
You didn't
lost
learn
the
anything.
entire point.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We didn't learn anything at all, and, frankly, it's become quite useless in that situation. Um, when you think about those, so I was talking to somebody recently about
Can I just
coaching.
make one more
Oh, yeah,
point
please.
before you ask one thing?
Absolutely.
Another thing, particularly for women, that I think is helpful is the AI can identify different speakers. So it can
Mm,
say speaker A, and you can say, well, that was Heather, and speaker B, you can say that was Cynthia. And then you can say, well, speaker A spoke 75% of the time. It can help us become more aware of who's speaking and who's not. And one of the pieces of advice I give leaders is going into meetings is stop talking. Go
mm,
in and listen. And you can look percentage of the time you're talking to see if you think you're listening. If you're talking 75% of the time, chances are good you're not listening. And the other
right.
thing is, if you think somebody in your group, if you're gendering it and you're saying, well, she didn't speak up or she spoke so much. No, she actually spoke 15% of the time because she was constantly interrupted. And I have the receipts to show you that. So it can be very helpful for that as well. And then one more thing is I asked ChatGPT recently, what am I missing? What's my blind spot? And that's another thing, if you're using it to take a lot of notes or you're using it as a cotton partner writing back and forth like I do on a lot of things, and because a lot of my work is public, it actually can give me answers. I can ask it to write something in my voice and it will simulate it, which is kind of creepy, but it can also see what ideas I'm pushing out there all the time and what ones I'm missing. And one of the things that it said I'm missing is I'm always looking out past the horizon and I'm not paying attention enough to where people are struggling in the moment. And I need to give
Mm.
more to that to people to process. So, I mean, I'm sure I can find more of my faculties. There are plenty of them, but it is helpful to check our cognitive blind spots in any way we can.
This is down that slope, but I was talking with a dear friend of mine who I check in with periodically to say, where do you feel like I'm missing an audience, missing the mark? I see things through a white female perspective. And
Right.
so am I missing a portion by not because of my own privilege, my own point of view,
Mhm.
et cetera. And we had that very conversation, and it was her friend, this friend who happens to be African American female, said, Cynthia, you can actually put in to chat how would you write this differently
Mhm.
if you were generalizing this to a broader audience, right? To people of color, to people of different sexual orientation, et cetera.
Yeah.
Am I missing something? And I thought that would not have occurred to me.
Mhm.
And it has been incredibly helpful because, to your point, we do have our own blind spots.
Mhm.
But it also loops back to using the technology in a way that advances our cognitive thinking
Mhm.
and makes us better rather
Mhm.
than sticking something in and saying, hey, write this post. And it pops out in my voice on my brand what I would write with my blind spots included
Yeah.
because big right because that's
Yeah.
what it's grown and learned to
Yeah.
develop from. So really important I think that's such a great takeaway for the person listening and tips and tools on how to use it to make you better. I was talking to somebody recently and they were saying, what about the financial person that their gift and talent is running the numbers and doing sort of the numbers in the spreadsheets and all of that that will ultimately be easily automated if it's not
Mhm.
already easily automated. And my thought was, but who's the person overlooking the data that's generated and taking it to the next level and saying, what aren't we seeing? Where are the holes in this? What are the consequences downstream? Using that same mathematical brilliance
Yeah.
to problem solve differently.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
also gonna change the role, so, your financial advisor may be able to, have a better plan, a more resilient plan even, coming out of AI, but the plan is for a human. So,
Right.
how do you communicate that? And that's where we're gonna have to lean into some more uniquely human skills. So what is it you want from technology, what does you want from a human? Like, I use the example, like, I use, Resi and OpenTable to make a restaurant reservation.
Hmm.
Now, it can do that and put it in my calendar and everything else, but the restaurant knows, well, when Heather comes in, she likes table 27, and when Heather comes in, she likes this drink, and if they can use that when I go into the restaurant to make the human experience better, using the technology to provide the insights or the hotels that I stay in. I mean, there's enough data out there between the
Hmm.
flights that I take and the hotels that I stay in, the restaurants that I eat at. I should be having seamless, amazing experiences, and I'm not.
Right. And it's the human that controls that
Yeah,
bottom line, that experience,
yeah,
right? That could take
yeah,
all of that. I mean, we talked about that previously as it relates to healthcare. It's, a lot of physicians push back against cookbook medicine, right? They
yeah,
don't want an algorithm telling them this is the care path and follow A through Z. But if the algorithm can take and source hundreds of thousands or millions of pieces of data and identify that these markers have a very high predictive validity to this outcome,
yeah,
why wouldn't you want to take that data
yeah,
but then the bedside manner, the how you talk about those things, the how you consider that in context with that person's maybe their economic situation, maybe their
yeah.
socioeconomic system may require some different wraparounds than what is spit out from the computer. I mean, that's where people show up.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, you look at any healthcare condition, what you're trying to do is make a behavior change, right? And what's the best
Exactly.
way to make the behavior plans? And the data can tell you, given this individual and their behavior in the past, here are the things, but it's the human interaction that helps make that behavior change.
Yeah. One of the things you also talk about is having sort of a learning mindset and organizations having a more learning mindset and this notion of from skills to capacity, sort of changing the way we think about that. Talk a little bit about that philosophy broadly. And then what does that mean for the person listening? How do they think about that differently for themselves?
Yeah, so if you look at how we have hired people, we've hired people based upon past skills and experience. So you hire somebody to do a job and you look for somebody who's done it before. Now we're starting to bump up against needing people to do jobs that have never been done before. And then we use degrees as proxies, like, oh, I need a data analyst, so I can't get one with experience, so I'm going to get someone with a degree. Well, the reality is for an undergraduate degree, it takes about a decade to build the curriculum, ramp it up, get someone to go through it and verify it. So 4 years to go through it, 3 or 4 years to build it, 2 years, you're at a decade, right? So then we
Right.
did short courses, we did other different ways of doing it. But what we're also starting to see now is even if I hired you for a job tomorrow and I could see that you had at least the requisite skills to do the first job, in 6, 12, 18 months, that job's gonna change. How do I know you can change with it? So that's where I started saying we've got to stop chasing the skills gap. Because
Right.
the reality is the skills gap is progress. A skills gap forms when a human demonstrates a skill and the market values that skill in excess of supply. If we stopped chasing the skills gap, we'd stop progressing. So what we need to do is be in a constant pursuit of narrowing it. And the one best way to narrow it is narrow it internally. So how do I hire people who have learning agility, who have adaptability? And Adam Grant in his book Hidden Potential writes about how he calls them character skills.
Hmm.
So his are pro-social, proactive, determined, and I can't remember the fourth one. And I think in there also needs to be curiosity and divergent thinking.
Hmm.
And that may be part of pro-social and proactive, but I think they need to be called out because the person who's comfortable saying, I don't know, but what if? I'm
Right.
willing to try this. I make my audiences say, I don't know, especially my leaders, because we've socialized leaders to be unquestioned experts who can make decisions in certainty. If that's your leader today, they're a liability. Because
Mm.
chances are good they're leading teams of people with skills and knowledge they don't. So you can't be making decisions in certainty. You've got to move from your individual intelligence to collective intelligence. So leaders need to focus on building collective intelligence, embracing dissent, um, establishing both accountability and psychological safety so that you can embrace that dissent. But if you're out there thinking about your own career, depending on if you're an individual contributor or you're a leader, the skills you need are really behaviors. And I use the word behaviors, other people use the word character skills. You can use them synonymously, but think about it more in terms of that. Am I comfortable not knowing? Am I
Mm.
comfortable trying and failing and learning quickly from those failures? Am I comfortable learning something new? If I'm only
Right.
comfortable doing it the way they've always done it, it's gonna be really hard for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and as you know, you graciously wrote the foreword to my new book, Human
Mhm.
Capital Investment Strategy, which is all about selecting differently, attracting differently,
Yeah.
leaning into what I call natural talents.
Yes.
So, another variation of what we're talking about, and
Yeah.
that is what makes us uniquely human.
Yeah.
The knowledge and skills are evolving so fast. To your point, that the skills that you achieve today are going to be different than those that you need 9 months from now, probably.
Yeah.
Which gets to one of the things that I think women in particular struggle with based on the data, which is, we when we look at the data, women tend to over-index on performance and perfection, men on potential. So in some ways, men are, from the generalizing perspective of the data, um, better equipped, right? And society and systems tend to look at them from a potential perspective. So, how does the woman listening that maybe is, I've got to master this thing, this skill that before I can move on to the next, what are some of the practical ways they need to change their mindset? Because to me, that's a big barrier to being adaptable and to seeing differently how they show up.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably referencing, I think it was the HP study that,
Yeah.
we hire men for potential and women for accomplishments, and a man will go for a job when they have 60% of the skills, and a woman will not only 100, but often more than 100%. They look to
Right.
have more than they're looking for just so they can get the job. And that's sort of absurd. I think one of the advantages to being a woman right now, and I'm making a somewhat of a generalization,
Right.
is we tend to better because we're socialized to be better at collective intelligence.
Hmm.
We're better at consensus. We're better at bringing in different people's decisions. And I actually think we need a change in how we hire leaders because I think a lot of the leaders that we have today and have had over the last decade or so are people who self identified that they wanted to be a leader. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes people want to be a leader so they can be unquestioned because they're actually insecure. And that's
Right.
like the worst kind of leader we need today. The person who seemed more ponderous, who asked more questions, who seemed less certain, was somebody we did not encourage to be a leader in the past. And that's the kind of leader we need today because that's the person who's going to more ask the just one more question that gets you to a better answer. So as females, step up, not lean in. I'm tired of that advice.
Same.
I think that just puts more shit back on women. And the
A
last thing we need is
hundred
to be
percent.
told to do one more thing. So
Right.
I think it's less on the leaders and the people who are hiring those leaders and nurturing those leaders. So if you're someone who's in charge of leadership, Look for the person who's asking more questions. Look for the person who can make more consensus than absolute decisions, and be wary of the person who's the unquestioned expert. I did some work for a diabetes company. I want to say it was like 20 years ago, and in diabetes, if you know anything about it, is a very complex, very emotional disease where 99% of the time you're trying to make a behavior change, right? So if you make technology, which is what this company did, to monitor the state of your condition, what's your blood sugar, et cetera, all their leaders were people who had PhDs and doctorates. They were unquestioned experts. And so they realized that they had an expertise curse problem. They realized that if they put a leader in charge who was over-indexing on their own expertise as being the solution to the problem, they weren't seeing the disease state in its entirety
Mm,
and with all of its potential. So they did a simulation where if you were over-reliant on your expertise, they wouldn't let you get above a certain level of management. You can continue to be a great individual contributor, but you couldn't be a leader because you couldn't see it beyond your own expertise. And there's lots of data that we will refute any information that contradicts our expertise and even our perceived expertise, which is called the earned
right.
dogmatism effect. So,
Yeah, it makes me think about that, what something you said earlier around expertise and the leader, just bridging your earlier point and this point is if leaders have to be curious and open to new ideas, recognizing that skills are changing rapidly. So select people in based on these attributes, behaviors, natural talents, pick a word, right? Over and above the skill and knowledge, which can be taught.
right.
It takes a confident person
Yeah.
who is not threatened to be able to do that
Yep.
because that openness, and so you're right, it gets back to the leader, not the person that has all the answers. And when we look at the validity studies around the predictive validity of old, tired, industrial revolution age um, selection tools like years of experience, et cetera, once again, we know that those are not highly predictive in determining future performance.
Sure.
Um, and they are going to be rapidly even less predictive with everything that's changing. The other thing that's so interesting is the notion around academia and the fact that it doesn't mean that academia isn't important, but relying solely on things like where you went to school, your GPA, et
Mhm.
cetera, are rapidly becoming l less important from a predicting your success and performance in a future role.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, a GPA is a less of predictor as than your ability to form a study group. I mean,
yeah,
that's a
yeah,
measure of can you get collective intelligence.
right. We look at it, it's less predictive than handwriting analysis. With all
Yeah.
due respect to those who study handwriting analysis, not a great predictive, valid study of future performance. Um One of the things that you and I share and that kind of pulls this all together and that is central to human capital investment strategy, my new book that again you wrote the foreword to, and
Mhm.
I'm so grateful for that, is this notion of and it's sort of the big bow I think on our today's conversation, which is we have to start investing in human capital with the
Mm.
same intentionality and rigor that we do our financial portfolios. And so, for those listening who have the responsibility, the opportunity, the privilege of leadership or running organizations, how would you emphasize that? Or what does that look differently, particularly in a time where I feel like so many companies are dumping a whole lot of money into technology and perhaps not giving the same foresight and forethought to the people side of things?
Well, I would ask you a question first. So, if you're a leader in an organization and you've had um, an employee, a leader in particular, who didn't work out, ask yourself how much of that was because of their technical skills or their behavioral skills.
Yeah,
We will invest not only in technology, but if you need training to use that technology, oh, sure, we've got a budget for that. But if you need a coach or you need some help with your behaviors around your leadership or your performance or your collaboration, we don't have money for that. When
right.
that is probably the greatest indicator of failure in an organization is the human stuff. It's not the technology skills, and soon we'll have less and less of a need to train people on technology because we'll be learning from and with it in such a fluid way. But those behavior problems are not going away, and we all have them.
Right. Yeah, we say that all the time when you think about and again, from a starting at selection. If you've selected somebody that doesn't work out, and I spent 3 decades in human resources, that's an organizational problem
Yeah,
because the bottom line is either they didn't understand the expectations of the role and it's a poor fit for that perspective, or you've selected somebody that is, how they naturally show up because everybody has talent, right?
right,
That's indiscriminate.
right,
Um, but if they don't like people and they're not a natural smiler and a natural extender, you probably don't want to put them in a role that requires them to do that to be successful, right? So,
right.
how are you aligning that? Because it's generally not that they didn't know how to answer the phone or do the report or do whatever the task at hand was. It's 99% of the time a failure of they didn't have the behavioral attributes that aligned with what was required to be successful in a particular role.
Yeah, and just look at that. I mean, let's look at a job box, like job box, and that job is defined usually by the last person who did it, if it existed
Mm,
before, and then you look for somebody to fit in that box. And it's absurd when you think about it. Why don't we look at the skills and talent of the people we have in our organizations and say, okay, where do we have blind spots? Where can we
mhm.
draw a new box? The best I have not had, I've had a lot of jobs in my life, but they've all been created around me. I've been very, very lucky. Like I've only applied for, I think, 2 jobs in my life. And they were like, lifeguard and working at a movie theater, more or less. When I was younger. Everything else came out of a conversation and the job formed around me. It's extremely rare. I'm extremely privileged. One of
Right.
those jobs, which did form around me, my boss at the time, we had a meeting and he said, Heather, I don't want you to go to meetings anymore. And I thought, oh my God, I'm getting fired. And he said, no, you're incredibly disruptive in meetings. I said, what do I do? I don't do anything. He said, yeah, you sigh and you roll your eyes and you shift in your seat because you don't understand why everybody else hasn't figured it out already and you're losing
Right.
your patience and you're sort of distractive. So I want you to focus on these other areas, which I think align more with your natural curiosity and your abilities and what's motivating for you. And then that turned into one of the best jobs I ever had because I was just doing this stuff that I was, good at and I was interested in and I was motivated and I worked so much harder than I did when I was forced to do things that I wasn't good at and I didn't realize I was being disruptive about.
Right. And so many things to unpack in that, right? You
Yeah,
had a leader who was able to see past and beyond, right, where your true potential lies and how that's a superpower. That
yeah,
curiosity, the fact that you think faster and reach a point of view quicker than the people around you. And so rather than saying, well, that's not a good fit for us, you don't fit in this square box,
right,
you need to go find a job somewhere else. I love to think about it in the context of a puzzle. If jobs were not these job descriptions that are these linear boxed in job descriptions, but they're puzzle pieces that are irregular shaped and, you know, because of your unique gifts and talents and background and experience and point of view, et cetera, and mine, together we sort of fit and make a whole. And then you keep adding to that. But you know what? When I leave, because I've graduated and I go do something else, you don't just fill that same puzzle piece. You
right.
need to reshift. And I don't think that organizations um, have the sophistication, have the insight, take the time, that and again is all the entire point of human capital investment strategy is the secret sauce to, okay, it's a different puzzle, right? Cynthia left, we need to think differently about has Heather gained some new things that change the shape of what she brings to the table and how does everybody else fit within that? Um I think it slows us down, and the reality is it shows up in constant churn, turnover, lack of engagement, right?
Yeah.
People leaving because they don't fit a particular box, us exiting folks and costing the organization a lot of money
Mhm.
because we're narrow in our thinking.
Yeah, and it's one of those moments where you slow down in order to speed up after. You basically,
Yes.
in this particular case, I mean, I had so many deficits. He wasn't suggesting I was excused to things because I was so much faster than everybody else. It was more that I wasn't seeing the need other people were having. And my job was actually to transform the organization. So I had to come up with a strategy on how we were transforming the organization. And my behavior in meetings was actually counterproductive.
Mhm.
And One of the things that he said to me, which helped me realize how I was being counterproductive and how I could think about it differently, is he said, "You keep saying we need to get them to do this. We need them to do this. You need to stop and say, what is the behavior we want? How
Mm,
are they motivated? How are they incentivized? What are they cared about? And how do we do something to get that behavior that we want?" And then once he transformed the question, I started thinking about what I did much differently. And that's a very fundamental way of thinking about it. What is the behavior you want in your organization? What are the behaviors you want people to have? And how do you incentivize those behaviors? Because a lot of folks are like, we got to get people back in the office and we've got to be hard with the numbers. And they're thinking about all these outcomes. Those
yes.
outcomes aren't incentivized in the same way. The behaviors that you want. I say to organizations, say, "Can you give me a talk on how to get people back in the office?" They said, "No, not based on that frame because nobody wants to hear back to anything." Back to is a terrible phrase.
Right.
You want people to work more in person and form better relationships. Turn your workplaces into friendship factories. When you
Mm,
have a friend at work, and if you have a best friend at work, you have higher levels of engagement, lower levels of turnover, and you can't have a friendship day to do it. It has to be a very human thing. Like, think about it like having a cocktail party. Who do you sit next to who at dinner? Who's going to talk? How do you make connections? How do you foster relationships? Think about your organization in that way, like a cocktail party you're trying to curate or a dinner party. How do you make connections between the people? What do they care about? How do you connect Susie over here with Jill over here? Do their kids go to the same school? Do they root for the same baseball team? Do they drink the same wine? What's a connection that you can offer that can foster a connection between them that they'll carry off with on their own? How
mhm.
do you create more human relationships at work? Because when you have better human relationships at work, you have far better human performance.
Absolutely, and it starts with being curious in the first place to know those things, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
the leader that has the curiosity, that knows what Susie and John and Sally and Jose and Tom, who they root for, and,
Yeah.
the name of their significant other, et cetera, so
Yes.
that they can help foster and make
Yep.
those decisions.
Yep.
So even tracking it back a little further, it starts
Yep.
with what is the connection that you have with the people that you have the privilege to serve alongside?
Yep.
And then using that, and orchestrating that to your advantage, which makes so much sense. Had the opportunity to speak with, a person that both you and I know, Josh Linkner, and
Mhm.
he really was talking about this. One other attribute I'll just add here is this notion of creativity,
Mhm.
and he was talking about everyone is creative, and I
Mhm.
said, "Oh my goodness, tell my children that." They think they're both artistic and musical and all these things, and they don't necessarily see their mom as the most creative, but we started talking about that from a perspective of innovation.
Yeah.
And another area to think about is when you're sitting in those quiet moments, not what is the skill and knowledge you have. That's a component of who you are, and that's a component of your human capital. But what do you do uniquely differently than others? What comes to you spontaneously? What do you do consistently? What brings you joy? And I've added to my thinking, where does creativity show up in a unique way to my talent set?
Yeah, and I see that and by the way, my undergraduate degree is in industrial design. I went to art school, and there aren't that many people out there who are speaking to companies about the future who have a degree in art. They don't think
Right.
that's a valuable degree. They think that's a huge waste of time, and I have to say it's probably the most important part of my education because I learned to question the question. And that
Mm,
questioning the question is probably one of the most fundamental things we're missing in our systems of education. It's getting the right answer. Well, you know what? The technology is going to get the right answer 9 days a week. We've got to get people who can ask better questions. And I have an entire talk on Solve Tomorrow's Problem about how do we ask better questions. And how do we find people who are naturally asking those questions? And one of the people I interviewed for, I think it was an Empathy Advantage, in that book, who has an incredible record for hiring the right talent. And he has a creative organization, but he hires people without skills all the time. He said, I can teach skills. What I can't teach is that intrinsic motivation. So I ask people, the most important question I ask people is what they do in their free time. Because what they do in their free time tells me how persistent they are, how curious they are, how how much learning agility they have. So he said he hired a woman who taught herself currency trading to do creative work at his organization because he's like, there takes a lot of persistence to learn currency trading, so she told me about that. Somebody else was a jazz musician, and the fact that they did that in their free time. And I know we're talking to women out here, and you have far less free time than everybody else, so I don't want anyone to be penalized for the fact that you're actually raising the next generation for us, and so much of it falls on your shoulders. So I wanna be careful to say, I know you have far less free time, but with the free time you do have, what are some of the things that you like to do? And when you had more free time before you had children or after your children are grown, what are some of the things you like to do? Because I think that's a real indication of your natural curiosity and your persistence.
And I like to say we all have 7 minutes. So
Yeah.
it's more than 5, less than 10, right?
Yeah.
Even if it's 7 minutes to live in that space of what you love and where you show up and where you're curious and so on. We're getting close on time. I could talk to you forever. I want to cover you are a international speaker that is on everybody's top list. How do folks get a hold of you? Of course, we'll have it in the show notes, but I want to make sure that those out there that are listening and saying we need more of this in our organization, we need to bring Heather in.
Sure. So you can find me on my website, heathermcgowan.com. I have a YouTube channel. I'll give you the links to that as well. But LinkedIn is my learning community. That's where I post what I'm reading, writing, thinking about. And that's where people tag me in things so that I don't miss them. So it's a real important community where I learn so much from that community. And people also will call me on things. I recently commented that I don't understand why we have to pay for internet in hotels. And if you've got a perk in the hotel, it gives you the perk they give you is free internet. Now, to me, that's
Right.
like free electricity. I mean, it's a given. So I
Yes.
would like our our hospitality folks to just drop that, please. It's as ridiculous as running water lately. And someone called me out for saying that as a point of privilege because she said, "I tried to hire you for an organization. I know how much you charge. You can pay for internet." And I said, "Of course I can, and you're right to call me out. I am privileged, but I was calling it out because not everybody can, and I don't think that information should be a barrier anywhere in a hotel,
Right.
in a school, in a neighborhood. I think internet access and access to information so that we can learn and be informed should not be a cost barrier anywhere.
Agree with you, and agree that LinkedIn does create a really great place for those that are willing to engage, even in a healthy debate,
Yep.
right, and have healthy tension. Sometimes it's not healthy, and
Yeah.
those get called out too. But I mean, that's
Yeah.
a perfect place to raise those kind of conversations, and we learn and grow as a result of that.
Yeah.
I always close these episodes with the ask of the guest of to speak to the person listening with one thing they should start doing, one thing they should stop doing, and one thing they should continue doing.
Okay, the thing you should start doing is making eye contact with people and saying hello, and where you have the possibility to say their name. 871,000 people die every year of loneliness. That's 100 people every hour. So since we've been on this call, close to probably 100 people have perished. It an epidemic that only we can solve. So I was at a talk in California with a bunch of CEOs, and it was over 2 days where I had a dinner the first night, a full day of talks, and then a dinner the second night. And on the first night dinner, as we were kinda setting up, I met the event staff and I met the event photographer. And I think his name is John. I said, "John, tell me about what it's like to be, like, this high-end photographer in these beautiful environments." He said, "It's alright." He said, "It's beautiful. It's alright." He said, "Nobody ever talks to me." He said, "Well, you're one of the first people outside of the event staff that's ever talked to me." He said, "Everyone treats me like a piece of furniture, like an object to
Oh,
avoid as they cross the room." And then I call it the hello effect. We can do a lot. For 24 hours, say hello to everyone within reason. Get in your Uber, say the person's name. All parts of our brains light up when we hear our name. We feel engaged, we feel seen and heard.
mm,
Checking into a restaurant, checking into a hotel, buying your groceries, I realized how often I was a zombie sleepwalking through everything and realizing when I get home, I bought groceries from another human. I never made eye contact with them and said hello or thank you because I was looking at my phone. We're all
right.
doing that. We need to stop doing that and talk to your neighbors because we are so socially and politically polarized because of this loneliness epidemic. Our amygdala goes into overdrive, we go into us versus them. So please start talking to your neighbors. What John told me after the second night, second dinner at that particular event, after I had given everyone that challenge, he said every single person came up and said his name, spoke to him, introduced himself. He said, "I feel so much differently." I said, "Differently now." And I
Oh,
said, "I bet they do too." And that's how simple it is, and we can do it. So start doing that. Stop doom scrolling. Stop doom scrolling. Stop also thinking that you're gonna change anybody's opinion on Facebook with some snarky comment to prove you're right. It hasn't I haven't changed my opinion for anything anyone else has ever written, and they're not changing it because of anything you wrote. So stop that. It's not helping us. It's just a profitable to divide us. And then start asking yourself, what is it I don't know and who might know it? And be open
Mm,
to finding that information in the unlikely places. It may be ChatGPT telling you that you're completely ignorant about this, or it may be someone in your own family who says, "Hey, you know what? You interrupt me all the time, and it's really annoying."
right. Right. Oh my gosh. That is such beautiful wisdom. And you're right. I was interviewing somebody recently about happiness and joy.
Mhm.
And it starts, to your point, that eye contact, that using people's name, that just making people feel they matter.
Yeah.
That sense of you matter, you're significant. Every
Yeah.
single person is significant.
And if I throw more piece out there, 20 million people in the US do what I call anonymous work. That is delivering packages, that is Uber drive exclusively to 50% of the population do some form of it, but 20 people exclusively do it, which means nobody knows your name, nobody knows your birth date, you get no joy, connection, or belonging from work. And we have interactions with those folks who deliver our packages and who give us rides and what have you. And we have an opportunity to help them feel seen and heard. And I feel it, I would say responsibility to do so.
I think that is a great challenge to all of us, and it is our uniquely human competitive advantage is to be human and to make other people feel significant. Heather, this was incredible as always. I always learn so much from you. I'm so grateful for your sponsorship and your mentorship and for the work that you're putting into the world, the messages that you're helping people hear in all parts of the world. I watch your travels and you're frequently in airports heading to some unique destination. So thank you and continue to do what you're doing and sharing the message. For those of you that have tuned in today, Heather, who is, as noted, a top futurist and somebody who is called upon by Fortune 50 companies around the world to help their leaders to step up and step forward and think differently, is also the wonderful contributor to Human Capital Investment Strategy, which, if you're listening to the podcast, the week it drops is due out for publication on February 3rd. You can order it in pre sale right now. You can get it on my website at dr-cynthia.com. And if you put in CCL for climbing the corporate ladder, CCL 25, you're going to get 20% off the retail price and $728 in free bonus material to hold you over for just a couple of weeks until it arrives in your mailbox. If you're ready to future ready yourself and your organization, this is a book you're not going to want to miss. Thank you again for joining another episode of Climbing the Corporate Ladder Without Breaking a Heel. Until next time, you've got this. Congratulations on choosing to invest in yourself. I know your time is precious. Thank you for spending it here with me. I believe in helping you look up, step forward, and fully realizing your potential. If today's conversation resonated, I'd be so grateful if you'd rate and comment on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And if you know someone who would benefit, please share this episode with them. Let's stay connected. Visit me at dr-cynthia.com, and you can find me on all the socials at Dr. Cynthia Bentzen-Mercer. Until next time, remember, boldly start working on your future today.